Welcome back to the Football Out West show. It's episode 86. Just a reminder, next week we will not be on air. It is Easter Sunday, so we are having a bit of a break, a bit of a breather. But in the meantime, folks, it's our pleasure to bring on the show Gary Cole. Gary, how are you? And it's an absolute pleasure to have you with us tonight.
Thanks, Sonch, Craig, Steve. It's great to be with you. Few technical issues here. The reception was, I thought you guys were speaking a language that you devised for out west because I couldn't understand a word of it. It's okay. I've joined them on the phone and it seems to be working okay right now.
Well, it is a different dialect out here, I must say, Gary. It's slightly different to everywhere else across Melbourne. So bear with us. We'll try and do our best to be heard and understood.
Can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
all good. All good. Can we actually kick off by talking about your Ted Lasso T-shirt? That is an absolute beauty. Where did you get that?
This is a good friend from a non-soccer person that lives out west, my mate Drew Hildebrand, who I work with, who I think I put him onto Ted Lasso as the best coach in the world. And True and his family adopted him and then found these T-shirts. So I've now got it. This is the second time I've worn it. It made its debut on the Football Coaching Life podcast last week. So got to honour Ted. I think he's a wonderful human being and we all need more coaches like Ted. Be like
Agreed.
Ted.
Yeah, agreed.
Love it. Craig.
Yeah, listen, thanks for giving up your time, Gary. It's really appreciative, and it's always good to get you on to talk football. Let's. Sorry, mate, you're going to say something? Thank you very much, sir. Yeah, very much. As seem to be getting very old now. Although I did have a shave today, and I put the wrong settings on the shaver, so it all had to come off. So, listen, mate, we just want to start. Congratulations on your inductee into the Football Victoria Hall of Fame. How did that come about, and what's how did it come about first and foremost, and what about the other guys that's on there with you? Because I think there was 5 inducted. Is that right?
I think there were 3 inducted into the Hall of Fame, and then 5 people, including 2 of the 3 in the Hall of Fame, were inducted as life members. I had a call late last year, in December, I think, to say that I'd been inducted and that they would sort of get back and wanted to, because in the past I've got a feeling that the induction into the Hall of Fame was done at a function, and we now live in the time of COVID, so functions were a no-no back then. And they decided to do a digital version to honour the other people, Frank Michich and the other lady that was inducted in that, whose name escapes me right now. But they collected my, thank God for my dear old mum that had a box full of memorabilia there and scrapbooks. So they captured all that, had us out at Heidelberg for an afternoon with Jimmy Rooney, Kenny Taylor, Jimmy Campbell, and we had a bit of a meander down memory lane. So it was great. From my perspective, it's obviously a wonderful honour to be inducted, but I think Tony Pasoglia is the only person employed, albeit part-time at the moment, but around Australia as a historian. So he's capturing so many of the wonderful stories of Australian football, and he's digitising those as we go along. So really that's how it happened. I have to admit, when I first got the phone call, I said, guys, look, I'm really honoured, but I think I'm already in there. And Nick said, well, no, Gaz, you can't be. And I said, yeah, I think back in around 2000. But I got inducted into the Soccer Australia Hall of Fame back then. So my memory failed me, and we corrected all that. So yeah, look, incredibly honoured. It's been a wonderful football journey, and thankfully it's still going.
Mate, let's talk about the history. Let's talk about when you first came to the country. We've had you on the program before, but let's nonetheless do the right thing and talk about the early days. And we've got some footage there, or we've got some photos there from your first few days when you first came to Australia from England. I'm sure we've asked this question before, but did you ever expect that you were going to last this long in the land down under?
No, and I nearly never, to be honest, Honch. My first 6 months was great. We arrived in summer. I went to Elwood High School, made a couple of mates. We used to dodge classes, jump the fence, go down to the beach. But I just miss London so much. You know, I was Jack the Lad in London with my other 16-year-old mates, and enjoying life, enjoying football, looking forward to getting my Lambretta license and being a general hoodlum around the place. So coming to Australia wasn't on the list of things to do. And I honestly pondered trying to stow away to get home. And I found out the night my mum passed away, because my dad and I sat and drank a bottle of scotch, they actually bought a ticket for me to go back. But it was football that I guess kept me here. Dad and I went to South Yarra, and the beginning of my football journey spiked my interest in Australia and helped me gradually turn around. So I miss London less and less. Came to love this beautiful country.
And Gary, you had a fantastic career, particularly when you're at Heidelberg Alexander, as it was then, Heidelberg United now. You must have some fond memories from the camaraderie in the dressing room, on the pitch and the training ground with the guys there. Be good to touch on that, but also a little bit on, do you keep in touch with the fortunes of the club at the moment in the current season, and having a very up and down season, fair to say?
Yeah, they are. They're having probably their worst start for a long while right now. And yeah, look, I stay in touch. I don't go down every week and watch, but I stay in touch with George, send him a message now and again, and Steve Salakides has done a remarkable job keeping the place together and afloat over the years. And obviously they've done a wonderful job working with local government and state government for funding to help redefine the place. But yeah, of course, you know, when I joined the club, it was Fitzroy United Alexander. It was 1976, the year before the National Soccer League kicked off. And I joined Vince and Paddy Bannon brothers played, George Gillam played. And it was, and we played at the Brunswick Street Oval.
Wow.
Wasn't until the second season that we changed to Heidelberg, because they managed to secure what is now known as the Olympic Village. And yeah, look, it was great, Steve, because they were wonderful, man. It was part-time. You know, we trained Tuesday, Thursday, Friday nights. We travelled. I told the Melbourne Victory players this on the first day of training. When we kicked off in 77, we actually thought full-time professional football was just around the corner. And it was 36, 38 years.
Yeah.
But I got to play with, you know, at one stage, I think there were 8 or 9 Socceroos in that squad. So when you go through them, Jaka Banovic, there was Jeff Olver, John Eisendorn, Jimmy Tansey, Theo Salamides, Andy Bazikas, Jamie Payton, Jimmy Campbell. You know, that's a remarkable group of people. We didn't play together all the time, but over, you know, my journey through the Socceroos as well, and the Victorian team, I got to play with those blokes. So as most of us didn't have family here, I was lucky. I had my immediate family. Most of them had come out by themselves or with a partner. You know, they were family, and in the main they still are.
Gary, you mentioned how when the Phillips National Soccer League, as it was known then in 1977, took off, you know, there was great expectations. A lot of people thought that there was going to be, you know, full-time professionalism just around the corner. But playing in the Victorian State League, as it was then, and then moving to the National League, did the standard just jump in leaps and bounds, you know, from your experience, or was it something similar to what you'd experienced in the State League, in the Victorian State League competition up until 1977? Yeah,
look, I think that the level was just more consistent more often. You know, you'd essentially taken at the time the best and strongest clubs from around the country, and you put them into a league together at the same time. So, you know, we went in with South Melbourne Hellas. We went in with Footscray JUST. Brunswick Juventus joined a couple of years in. I'm no good with the chronology of that. Western Suburbs in Sydney, Marconi, Apia. Sydney.
Footbalkl first year.
And look, I don't know if you know that story, but Ted Bailey, who was the chairman of Footbalkl, he was the one that definitely said, yes, we're going, because VSF had threatened all of the clubs if they left to go into the National League and it didn't work, they wouldn't be allowed back into Victorian football. So the clubs got a bit titchy. They weren't quite sure because no one knew what the future would hold. But Tom Bailey, bold as brass, said, "I don't care. We're in it. We're going." And unfortunately, they only lasted a season. But without Footbalkl and what they did, you know, maybe Fitzroy and South Melbourne and Footscray JUST wouldn't have jumped in at the time. But the general standard was high. Obviously, with the National League, you know, the better players at some of the other Victorian or the state league clubs got signed and moved across to not just the Victorian clubs, but around the country. So I think overall the standard was higher more often. But by the same token, you know, I got into the Ringwood City Wilhelmina first team when I was 17 because Peter Ollerton transferred up to Sydney. And the good teams were good teams. You know, there's no shirking that. They were strong, they were tough. The game was very, very physical. The pitches were, let's just put it, not quite as nice as they are today. So you got a competition week in, week out. But no doubt, Tonch, it definitely moved up to a new and more consistent level.
I'm thinking out loud now. I'm just wondering, with all the talk of the National Second Division possibly kicking off next year, and you know, we've just had Caroline Springs George Cross, one of those clubs that was involved in the old NSL, a club that will definitely be looking at, along with clubs like Preston, Melbourne Knights, South Melbourne, Heidelberg, your club, of entering that National Second Division. In your opinion, do you think the standard of football in that second tier will increase with this proposed National Second Division?
Well, again, you would think it would, because it's exactly the same as setting it up the first time around. I know this is the second time around, but the better young players and the better players that can't get an A-League contract, or the players coming back from overseas that can't get an A-League contract, or the older, more experienced players that can't get another contract are going to have this other opportunity, as are the coaches, of course, and there's going to be opportunities for referees as well. So I think it certainly should. The challenge is going to be, what does it look like? You know, is it going to be a 28, 32 round competition? Is it going to be you know, I've heard it discussed as like a keep it the same. The NPL will have this playoff at the end of the season and things like that. But if it's going to be a regular competition, there's a move to say the players should be full time, and that raises challenges around, you know, funding and clubs paying for that. But everyone thinks that's doable. So if that can happen and the players are going to be training day in, day out, let's assume that we get, you know, good quality coaching in there as well, then I think it definitely should. Can I just say, though, I don't necessarily believe that in and of itself it can be the panacea. You know, if depending on how all this is structured, if the young players playing in it are only playing 16, 20 games a season, then in and of itself, I don't think that solves the dilemma. If the players are getting 30, 40, 50 games a season because we've got this other development process to assist them in there, then they're going to get better.
Now, Tonchi's just asked me if I want to ask you anything, and that was exactly the question I was going to ask. So is obviously having a second division really detrimental if they're only playing 22 games a season, Gary? And you know, we talk, and we'll touch on it in the other part of the show, but we've talked about it over the years about how the development of young footballers and how we get the young footballers playing at the highest level we can here in Australia. 22 games is not enough in NPL. It's not enough in state league football. It's certainly not enough in NPL. So is that a big criteria that needs to be addressed before it goes ahead?
No, because I think I'm a great believer, Craig, that progress is more important than perfection. So perfection to me says, you know, there's at least 32 games. What is it? If you've got 16 teams, that's 30. You know, that's a minimum of 30 games. So I think that would be a wonderful place to start. But maybe the beginning of it isn't that, and we build on it. What I can't say, because I'm not privy to it, I know that Steve Salakidis has invested, God only knows how much of his time, his effort and his money into Heidelberg. And he thinks it's doable and he thinks it's sustainable. So I'm not the right person to argue against it. But I don't believe that 20 games solves it, because those 20 games are going to be at a standard that's a bit further up. For me, we've got to do something more for young players. Now, whether and again, we don't know, you know, the season's going to overlap. There's been talk of overlapping the NPL2 with you would think it would need to run in conjunction with the A-League if at some stage there will be promotion and relegation. But there's so many unknowns for us to determine. But if you come back to, you know, I think we're all old enough and wise enough to know that in and of itself, a small number of games just doesn't help players develop quickly enough.
Yeah. Now, Gary, you spent some of your earlier parts of your coaching career full-time up in Canberra at AIS. Let's talk a little bit about player development from that perspective. What can we learn from the times when we did have that program in place compared to now, and what we should be looking to do in that space for that player development of those players at the very top of the elite pathways that are flourishing as they approach senior football age?
Yeah, Steve, that's a wonderful question. And again, it's like everything in Australian football. The answer's not that simple.
Yeah.
I drove, my wife and I drove up to Sydney for the Socceroos Japan game. We then went to the Football Writers Festival in Kiama for the weekend, which was extraordinary. And then driving back, we stopped in at Canberra and we spent the night with Ron and Alison Smith, who was the head coach at the AS when I was there, and went out for dinner. And we've had plenty of discussion, you know, around this. Because I was going to catch up with Ronnie, I went to the website that's run by Sport Australia, which his name escapes me right now, and I looked to every squad in the men's program. Sorry, so this is men's specific at the moment. I looked to every player in the squad that went through there. Oscar Crino was in the first squad that went through. It is, if you haven't done it, you should go, and I'm happy to send you the link. As a finishing school for Australia's best young talent, it was without doubt the best thing we'd ever done, because it worked in conjunction with the state institutes, which were essentially the under-17 programs. So the state institutes were about developing players for the Joeys, and the AIS was about developing players for the under-20 program, and there was a bit of crossover in there. So for me, the best training with the best, they played together. You know, at different times they played. Well, the first season I was there, we played in I can't remember what it was called then, Victorian Premier League maybe. We weren't allowed to play for points, and we won it by 9. We weren't allowed to keep the points. But that was a fantastic season we drove down. Then the following year in the New South Wales National Youth League, I think, and it was different again. So challenging across the time. For me, I love the concept of the best training and playing against the best and with the best. So for me, that, I don't know how much it costs, and I think I understand why we took it away. So in looking to save some money, as football administrators tend to do, and the technical staff at the time of Football Australia saying, we can't afford just to have the AIS and these state institutes. We aren't getting enough players with access to good quality coaching. And so we said, all right, every A-League team, A-League men's team, needs an academy. And we hand-passed the responsibility of the development of players to the A-League clubs. And, you know, part of me says there's some really, really good things in that, and the clubs that are well-resourced and have done a great job in there have produced some wonderful young talent. There's some other clubs where, you know, maybe the investment hasn't been as great. And so maybe the players coming through, there's not been as many of them. But I still think there's a place for the best training and playing with the best. And you can get a season of playing plus ongoing regular competitions. You know, back then as well, we had state and national championships. There were, here in Victoria, we had regional teams. So kids were getting a lot more football. And I think they were getting some good quality coaching as well.
Okay, we're speaking with Gary Cole, who's one of 6 inductees in this year's Football Victoria Hall of Fame. We're going to take a quick break, and when we return, we're going to continue talking with Gary about life after football and what he's been up to recently. Don't go away, folks.
You find authentic Maltese cuisine? At Georgie's on Vista, in the heart of Fraser Rise. We have a menu to suit everyone, which includes kids and seniors meals, and a cocktail list that will need you to come back several times to get through. Our specialty nights are a big hit. Tuesday is $20 Palmer night with a selection of Palmers to choose from. Kids eat free Wednesday night. With every paid adult meal, you get 1 free kids meal. Thursday is Maltese night. Check out the Maltese specials on our specials board. And Friday night, we have happy hour between 5:30 to 6:30 p.m. Be sure to book your table to avoid disappointment. Bookings can be made via our website, georgiesonvista.com.au. See you at Georgie's on Vista. You'll find us at Caroline Springs, George Cross.
Welcome back to the Football Out West show. It is episode 86, and we're continuing our conversation with Gary Cole, inductee of the Football Victoria Hall of Fame. Craig, have you got a question for Gary?
Yeah, I just really want to touch on what he's been talking about there about the history, the AIS, and I suppose it would be remiss of us not to ask the question while we're talking about it. But the Socceroos currently, obviously gone through a bit of a torrid time in the qualifying period. Obviously, still an outside chance of qualifying, of course. Yep. But how much of an impact is not qualifying for the World Cup going to have on Footbalkl? As an ex-Socceroo yourself, and you know, not qualifying for a major tournament is hugely damaging. You know, and everybody talks, you know, I've been here 10 years now, and everybody's still talking about the 2006 squad. Well, we're now almost 20 years later, and we're the country's still in a very vulnerable position in terms of the national side. What needs to change on that? And I know you're close to Arnie, so I don't expect you to. But what needs to change, mate? Because obviously there's been a lot being said on it over the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, big question that, Craig. Mm-hmm. So where do you go? Let's start where it currently is. I think if no matter how much green and gold you bleed, the performance against Japan in Sydney recently, and the loss to Japan in Sydney, shows that there's a gap. And for me, one of the early things, I've had this conversation with a few former Socceroos, Peter Rolleton included, who played in that 74 World Cup squad during the week. Early on in the game, there was a ball down their left, knocked over our right back's head. And he and the Japanese winger chased it, and they're shoulder to shoulder running along. And the Australian bloke essentially gives him a hip and shoulder, and he ended up on the ground. That was Ryan Grant. And the Japanese bloke went forward, and they're now attacking again. And I looked at it and I went, you know what? That sort of sums up a bit about where we're at. Because back when the 74 team played in Asia, back when my generation played, before the golden generation got to be really, really good footballers. But the one thing that all Australian players had was the physicality helped us stand out in Asia and Oceania. We were quite not necessarily always quicker, but stronger, more powerful, and we could use that to our advantage, as well as play good football, because we had
not even that guy. They were the guys that went to Europe, the guys that were playing in the old first division at the time, your Vidukas, strong physical football players.
That's how they got a gig in those competitions, Craig.
Yeah.
So, you know, what's happened in the last, I'm not quite sure, let's call it 20 years, the development, the investment, and I don't know this, I can't prove this because I can't pull the numbers out, but this is the way it looks to me, that the investment in the development in football in Australia appears to be well short of the best teams in Asia. Now, you know, Japan's been working on their plan for about 30 years now. They've got 30 professional teams now. I think they started with 10. They've now got 30. Their players are, firstly and foremost, technically very, very, very good footballers. Their touch, their vision, their passing is sensational, and so is in Korea, etc., etc. But now they match us physically. They're all like bloody lightning, and they're strong as oxes. So, you know, that has sort of gone away. Now, I don't know whether you have to get that back anymore because the game's certainly changing. But to me, you do. If you want to play at the top level, whether that's for club football or international football, you've got to be prepared, obviously, physically, technically, and mentally as well, to be able to go and compete. And please don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that the guys didn't compete. What I'm saying is we are that physical side of what we offer isn't what it was. And the overall development to me right now, I'm going to say, isn't quite where I think it should be.
What do you put that down to, Gary? Why are we not? Why is it not physical now? Why are we not concentrating on that side of the game? Is it because the curriculum isn't all about, you know?
No, I'm not going to blame the curriculum because I honestly don't know. And at the end of the day, the you know, isn't the curriculum a reference document?
Absolutely, it's not a Bible, is it?
You know, you're out there coaching kids week in, week out. So you can probably tell me a better story than that because I'm sitting here watching it, and certainly the best football in the world is physical. You know, whether you're watching the CONMEBOL qualifiers on the TV or the Euro, it's not quite as physical as it used to be, and the ground's a lot better. The players are all technically better, but they're fit, they're quick, and they're unbelievably strong. And if they're not, they're just not playing at that level. So I don't know exactly what happened. I wish I had this magic ball and I could say, this is it, fix this bit, and it changes. But I would still like to see, I think if we want to invest in something, I get that we want all the A-League clubs to have academies. The plan is for all the NPL clubs to have academies as well. And we've got this wonderful collection of coaches around the country that are developing players. So I think we've had this conversation before. How do players get better?
More game time, more time on the training field.
They do, yeah. So more training time, more playing time. More learning in the game because that's an important part of it, but good quality coaching as well. And I can't answer that right now. All I know is this, that as a country, we've put through thousands of coaches through coach licenses, and we call that coach education. And that's a bit like calling kids, 18-year-olds getting driver's license, driver education. You know, it isn't. A license is a license. It gives you access to the roads. It doesn't make you a great driver. So I think we've got to invest in our coaches, particularly the young ones, and maybe we need to encourage some of the older ones back in to help some of the to help with the younger players as well. But for me, it's a twofold thing. I don't see how you get better players without having better coaches.
All right, Gary. Well, it's the biggest time we've ever had in the history of our nation's footballing past for women's football coming up over the next 12 months. Let's talk a little bit about that. We actually had young Stephanie Gretsch, the captain of Georgie's side, with a great interview before. Great culture there at their club, and I think they're doing all the right things, getting the youngsters involved to aspire up to the play in the senior team and all that sort of stuff that, you know, has been identified in the reports about what made our golden generation great, that sort of thing. But our current Matildas, we've got a great squad of players. We've got some great talent in there. but the sum of the parts don't really seem to form a great team right at the moment. At least it appears that way. We've crashed out of the Asian Cup. We've got this big tournament, the World Cup, on our own shores. Can you see it? Can you see things going okay for us, or are we going to be disappointed, do you think, next year?
Oh, goodness me. Honestly, again, it's just so hard to call.
Some tough questions tonight.
We've got this wonderful group of women that are playing now. They are the golden generation. You know, they're playing in the top
for sure.
in Europe, and not just, you know, a handful of them. There's good numbers playing there again. Individually, there's no doubt they stand up. Collectively, to me, they still look like they're a work in progress. You know, I don't know Tony, and I don't want any coaches to get the sack. Hey, I'm on the executive committee of football. we want coaching contracts to be honoured, and on that, you know, when you sign a national team coaching job, you've got a job for a 4-year cycle, and your goal's pretty simple: get this team to the World Cup, and once you're there, you know, go ahead and win it. Now, the expectation for us is that even if Arnie qualifies for the World Cup, that'll do us, because we know we don't have a hope in hell of winning it. For Tony Gustafsson, he's already qualified. The job's easier. We're hosting it. He's already qualified. But because of where the players are, the expectation in Australia is we should win it. And, of course, we were very bold as brass. We said we were going to win the Asian Cup, and we got knocked out in the quarterfinals. There's this big question mark humming around in the background, and that's a difficult place to work. But, you know, at the professional level, you get paid the big bucks, and the big problems go along with that. So what I'm not going to do, Steve, is profess to be an expert on women's football, because I'm not connected to it often enough. I know people are working really, really hard. I know and believe we've got some wonderful players. Are they going to come together at the right time? I'm praying like everyone else.
Yeah, I think we all are. Yeah, exactly.
Gary, you mentioned how your involvement with coaches and coaches, Football Coaches Australia. One of the things that you've been doing, and you're basically a colleague of ours, and that is the podcast there. So that's it. Coaching Life, the Football Coaching Life podcast. Tell us a bit more about that. And has that got you a little bit itchy to take up coaching, listening to all these coaches week in, week out, providing all these? Are you sort of saying to yourself, "I could do that. I could do better"?
Don't you? One of the very strategic questions I ask all of them is why they do it.
Yeah,
and we get things. So, look, I have to say I've done a lot of things in football all the time, and this is up there with the most enjoyable. It was born out of COVID, because, you know, coaches, particularly here in Victoria, weren't coaching, and people like Ian Greener and Ronnie Smith and a good friend in Queensland, Paul Edwards, that were on the technical committee of Football Coaches Australia. We were sort of having a chinwag every Monday or Tuesday afternoon and talking about, you know, what were the things that we could do, what presenters could we get on and do webinars. And then I just said, you know what, we should maybe just talk to coaches about their journey, because if you think of it, when do you hear from a football coach? You hear from him when he gets a job, when he gets sacked from a job, before a game, after a game, and occasionally someone asks their opinion about another game. So unless you're Ange and you've got your book, most people don't know the story of Australian coaches. And the remarkable thing is there is so much wisdom, whether you're a football coach or a bloody netball coach or a AFL coach, if you're in business, because these are people that are leaders. They lead men and women. They understand culture. They understand development. They understand pressure. They understand performance. And because I'm not in the mainstream media, it's just guys, it's a bit like me and these coaches sitting down for a beer or a glass of wine and just having a talk about football. So, Tonch, it's just been an absolute blessing for me on a personal level, and I can't thank them all enough for their honesty and transparency. You know, the way that they've opened up and told me some of the intimate details of their coaching journey has been quite remarkable, and I'm certainly honoured to share their stories.
And the last one you had was the great Kenny Lowe, who, if you haven't listened to it, grab yourself half an hour, grab yourself a coffee, sit back and just listen. It was bloody fantastic. And I think it was a question you asked, and I did write it down. I've lost my piece of paper, but it was a question you asked me about how did he become a coach. I think he said something along the lines of, get your badges, spend 20 years on a field, and hope you don't get sacked. Something along those lines it was. And it was just fantastic.
Absolutely. And look, what a wonderful man. He had a fantastic playing career from all levels in England. Came to Australia in the 80s, believe it or not, turned down a contract in Europe and came to Western Australia to play for a year. And then went back and got a degree in engineering. And he's a full-time bloody engineer in the chemical and all that stuff as well. And then he coaches... I can't remember the name. Isn't it? He was the longest-serving first-team coach at Perth Glory, so 5 years there. FC Joondalup, that's it. Joondalup, yeah. He coaches, I think, the under-14s and the first team. He's director of football in his spare time, which he reckons that's why his marriage has lasted so long. He's been married to his wife for 30 years, but because he's been out so often, he reckons they're still in the honeymoon period because they've only really been together for about 5 years. So, it's just, he's got a wonderful sense of humour. He obviously cares about people, and the number of players that he's helped develop on their journey and, they're still in contact speaks volumes for the man and his coaching journey.
Final question, Gaz, before we go. We've touched there on Football Coaches Australia. For those that don't know about Football Coaches Australia, can you give a little bit of an insight into that and how coaches can get involved in that? Because I'm part of that myself, and I remember, I think through lockdown earlier on in the year, there was a 12-week course that we all had that was every Monday for an hour and a half, and we had different coaches come on from around the country and talk to us about session plans and stuff like that, and it was really interesting. So can you just give us a quick insight into that for us?
Yeah, sure, Craig. I'd love to. Look, the organisation's about 3, maybe coming up to 4 years old now, and was set up by coaches for coaches initially, and still there's because it was initially set up for professional coaches, there's more for professional coaches than there is for community coaches right now, albeit that's changing. We understand that really, really needs to happen. So there's an opportunity for coaches to learn. In my earlier thing about licensing, I've said, the federations, the member federations do licensing courses, but there's not an awful lot of then ongoing education. Pre-COVID, of course, we would have the annual coaching conference, but in and around that, there's not necessarily a lot of on-the-field coaching practical help. So, that was one of the things that we really want to do, was to help coaches grow and develop. There is a growing truckload of opportunity to do that. A program that you mentioned before, Sports Session Planner, which is being used by thousands and thousands of coaches around the world. Australian coaches can now access that and plan their training sessions, share them with their players, with the teams at the club. The clubs can buy it. All the coaches can be on it. That's a whiz-bang tool. Then we partnered with Xventure, which is, I'm going to call it the new age of education. It's online learning, but this is state-of-the-art. It's virtual learning and helps coaches learn the soft skills of coaching, I'm going to say, as opposed to the hard skills of being out on the grass playing. There's representation. We in the beginning days of the organisation, we represented Alan Stajic when he parted ways with Football Australia. And on an ongoing and regular basis, Glenn Warry, who's our honorary CEO and does a absolutely remarkable job. What we do without him, I'm not quite sure, but we've got some legal people both here in Australia and in Asia where we can offer coaches advice. At the moment, David Zrilic, was former Socceroo and currently an assistant coach at Genoa in Italy, albeit he can't have a coaching contract because his UEFA Pro which is an Asian AFC pro license, isn't recognised by UEFA. And because he hasn't coached a national team for 5 years, he's finding it really difficult to get that contract verified, let's put it that way. So we can help people like David. We've got standard coaching contracts. So if you're a community coach that, you know, wants to firm up your relationship with the club, even if it's only, you know, half a dozen stubbies a week or whatever you're getting, but there's a free template contract you can use. So generally, by and large, that's it. It's a wonderful organisation. Then, of course, you know, the online opportunities that we set up during COVID are still there. And, you know, I can't not give myself a plug. I think the Football Coaching Life podcast, which you can listen to, and there's now a YouTube channel where you can watch it as well, is just a wonderful opportunity for you to learn, whether you're driving around in your car or you're sitting in your lounge room with a glass of wine at night. You can listen to some of the best Australian coaches, male and female coaches, talk about their coaching journey and what they learned along the way. And if there's not some opportunity for any coach to learn a bit, I'm a dinosaur coach in my armchair, but I've learned so much. It's not funny. footballcoachesoz.org.au. All of your podcasts, all your favourite podcasts app will have the podcast, which is the Football Coaching Life by Football Coaches Australia. And if you go to YouTube and search for Football Coaches Australia, the podcast will come up there as well. So, yeah,
awesome,
great work by some great men and women.
Mate, thank you very much, Gaz, for joining us tonight on the Football Out West show. We've got the links there in the comments section to both the podcasts and obviously the Football Coaches Australia website itself. Mate, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show, and we thank you very much for joining us on episode 86.
Tonch, Steve and Craig, thanks for the invite, guys. Keep up the wonderful work you do promoting our beautiful game. We need you. We need people out there talking about it so we can grow and develop and get better.
Absolutely, pleasure.
Yeah, thanks
Good
so
on you.
much.